So we had talked and worked out some ideas of things that we thought food and bev startup companies or people mid-stage like we're at would benefit. And we have a very experienced person here with us, Dan Klock, who has done some names, brand names that you know, Bare Naked Granola. He was key in that company. His wife, Kelly, is amazing, and she was one of the founders of Bare Naked. And then also anyone with kids, do you know Happy Baby? Have you heard of that brand? Dan and Kelly were behind that one as well. So we are extremely lucky here in Oregon to have some founders, and in particular, Dan and Kelly, who are so willing to share their experience. So to start off, we thought about talking about channels. How do you decide what channels to pursue when you look, and this can go across food and bev as well. But I think one of the questions that we had as we got started at Red Plate, and maybe I should share a little bit about Red Plate. We do top 8 allergen-free, certified gluten-free and vegan products. We're a baked goods company right now. Our vision is to be much larger than that with the brand. But we are not just in the business of making cookies, muffins, cupcakes, and granola, but we're really about creating normal for people. So if you're kind of aware of the statistics or the trends in special diet, people, over 30% of the US population is avoiding some type of ingredient, and we're here to help serve that market. But that's pretty broad. So how do we figure out what channels to go to? And for us, that was starting with certainly food service, where people are eating, and also shopping at retail, grocery. There are a lot of other places we could go, warehouse or C-store, but we've chosen to focus our efforts because we're tiny and didn't have enough resources. But maybe, Dan, you could talk a little bit about Bare Naked and how you, and Happy Baby, and even...
Sure. So our background is in packaged foods, natural foods, as Becca said, thank you. My wife did start Bare Naked back about 16 years ago. We sold that to Kellogg's in 2007. Happy Baby started 2008, sold that to Dannon in 2013. And Bridgetown, the company we're with now, we are a supply chain and manufacturing partner who develops products for brands. So if you guys shop at Trader Joe's, we make a lot of the Trader Joe's snacks. If you guys shop at Fred Meyer, we do all their organic granolas. If you guys buy things like Cliff Bars or Kind Bars here in Oregon, chances are we probably make them. So we're now kind of like the people behind the brands who do the product development and then the scaling and operations behind that. So I'm probably a little dated on my channel strategies. I think the most important thing is to be disciplined about saying no to things that aren't good. I don't know if you guys have encountered that yet, where you've had to turn someone down and you feel like you want to grow, but you have to kind of put the brakes on things a little bit.
You know, I think we're getting to that point for sure. When we got started, it was throw things at a wall and see what sticks. And so we've ended up seeing which channels pay off the best. Food service is probably a really good example of a broader category of channel that we've gone into. We're now in Cisco. And within Cisco and within food service, there are a lot of sub-channels, I would say. So for us, we're discovering that multi-unit in particular. So when we look at hospitals or K through 12 or university, each of those requires a lot of resources to address. And so we are starting to become a little more choosy about where we go and utilize our resources for the best leverage.
And for folks who are kind of starting out, I guess, how do you think about deciding what's good growth and bad growth? Is it more values and principles driven? Is it more economically driven? Or when you say there's areas we want to go and areas we're not going to go, like how do you make those decisions? How would somebody think about that?
Boy, I think the base for us is it has to start with our values and our mission. We really don't want to vary from that. If any of you saw the little packets of granola up by the yogurt area, that's our product that we do really large volumes for schools. And so for us, our mission is inclusiveness, of course, but also clean label and healthy product. And we've been approached by our distributor that we private label for on that item to make it less expensive, because K through 12 is a really price-sensitive market. So we're conscious of that. We work toward that with them. But the baseline is we're not going to put anything out that we're not willing to put the red plate label on, even if we're private labeling it. And so, yeah, all of it goes into the mix of figuring out what makes sense for us. But of course it has to be profitable at some point. Of course it has to sell to the customer. But we're in business for a mission beyond just making money. So everything has to kind of fit that litmus test before we do it.
Is there, in your experience, a too fast or a too slow? Like, do the wheels start coming off when you start going a certain speed or opening too many doors? Or
You mean like when I'm getting sick, like I am right now, because
Yeah.
we're working like crazy? Yeah, I think there is. I think there's a point at which you can be getting out over your skis and not producing the product in the quality that you want to, not being a good employer as you'd like to. So we're really trying to be mindful of that as we grow. I'm sure you've had that as well with your companies.
Yeah, we had fast growth. So Bare Naked, we got from 0 to 50 million in sales in about 5 years. It was very much driven by Costco. Bridgetown, we got from 0 to 100 in 5 years, so it was even faster. And I think people from the outside oftentimes look in and say, wow, it must be so great to be growing. And we hear people who work at low growth companies call and say, we want to come over. What I would say for people who are starting companies and are growing quickly is you leave a lot of bodies on the side of the road growing that fast. It is not always as rewarding as it might seem from the outside, and you face a lot of difficult decisions between, is this what's best for the business? Is this delivering on the mission? How does this impact the people who work here? Because they're not easy decisions. Not everybody can scale at the same speed. Not all founders can plan for growth well. I have made lots of mistakes along the way. So I would say that growth looks great from the outside. It wreaks havoc on your personal life, as we've talked about.
Actually, you provided, I think, some of the best advice that we have had over the course of time, which is 2.5, 3 years ago, you and I met.
Yep.
And I told you what our goals were, and you had said to me, all right, if those are your goals, here's what you need to prioritize. You need to prioritize your health, your family, and then the business. Everything else you need to put on hold. I know you probably like to volunteer, and you like to visit with people, give back to the community. And Dan said, I'm able to do that, and I'm able to sit down with you today because I prioritized those other things while we grew Bare Naked and while we grew Happy Baby. So that was a huge learning for me, to be given permission in a way. Thank you, Dan,
Welcome.
for saying no and really paying attention to what the important things were in life. And I wasn't doing a good job of it at the time that I sat down with Dan. And so it's continued to stretch me, but hopefully we're at least in better alignment. My husband's in the audience. I'm sure you could all talk with him privately over beers and hear different stories. But we are, I think we're trying to stay true to that. And hopefully we have conversations all the time. You're going to sleep and you're worried about whether you are leaving those bodies on the side of the road. And so we're trying to talk as partners about, are we doing the right thing for our employees, for our community, and for, of course, the priorities of our family, our kids. So.
Yeah. And it all kind of ties back to your goals, right? What are you trying to get out of this, and how do you weigh those things? I guess from kind of what happens along the road to growth, how do you think about introducing other people to partner with you, maybe fundraising, investors, and then how do you think about the limits of like your supply chain as you grow? How do you kind of think about that in terms of making sure your consumer always has the best possible experience?
Right. Well, let's see. Let's start with supply chain. That's something that very early on we had to address because of the allergen safe component of our company. We definitely started out with checking through our vendors very carefully. Anything that's a high risk ingredient, we've even sent our fulfillment and procurement manager to go visit those sites, make sure that the allergen protocols that they say they're carrying out are in fact being put in practice in their facilities. But Supply chain definitely stretching us at this point as well. Dan heard my story about a week ago, those granola packets, again, back to those lovely granola packets. We have a lot of POs that need to be filled on that right now. And we're chasing gluten-free oats from our verified supplier. We literally had to rent a U-Haul and drive it around the state last week to try to collect any. And if anyone has any, raise your hand right now. We are looking for gluten-free oats. And I have Dan on the stage who's suggested that there might be a guy he knows who could help with that. But yeah, supply chain, definitely we went into it knowing that we needed to have partners who were solid. We've looked to who the secondary supplier might be and how do we build a relationship with them even if we can't feed all of our business to those suppliers. And then, of course, having community partners. Even from the very get-go, we started out of a space that was licensed by Department of Ag, licensed by City of Bend, but attached to our home. We couldn't get commercial deliveries up there. So one of our fun war stories of Red Plate is that Scott over at Hydro Flask offered to go ahead and receive product at their warehouse. And so they did that for us for about 6 months. And so that was kind of a supply chain addition. Yeah. And then we transitioned, we were able to start receiving shipments. We had a bag break open, or actually, so a shipment went to them later on, a couple years in, a couple pallets went to them of flour that broke open in their facility, and we had flour everywhere. So there have been hiccups in the supply chain, but yeah, we're getting to the point now where we're confident in our suppliers. We've been grateful to Glory Bee, shout out to Glory Bee in the audience who supplies our sweeteners if anybody's getting into the business. They're great. And they're actually, that leads into a safety question for you also, Dan. FSMA is an issue that's coming up. Is anybody in the audience working on FSMA? Raise your hands, concerned about it. All right, so that date in September came up where small to mid-sized companies had to be compliant with FSMA. And that's something that we're certainly working toward. But Dan, that would be an area that I think would be good for you to share, both on supply chain best practices, but in particular with Food Safety Modernization Act, for anybody who's not familiar with the FSMA.
Sure. I guess I would say on the supply chain side, for those of you who are not in food, the issues are somewhat similar. Kelly and I were investors in Bonobos, which is a clothing company that sold to Walmart, which was not how Bonobos started out, but sold to Walmart 2 years ago. And we've had the same issues in every business, whether it's Bare Naked, Happy Baby, Bonobos, even a digital SaaS business we've invested in. Bonobos wanted to expand too fast, opened up a West Coast operation to start doing more of the web engineering, and it just totally collapsed. So whether it's in tech, and I'm not certainly as proficient in tech, or whether it's in consumer goods, always think about what your consumer experience is, and don't go faster than you can maintain the quality of your consumer experience, because it'll kill your brand unless you're a very big company, which you'd be penalized for it as a big company, but you'd probably recover. But as a small company, it's like being in an airplane with no lift, right? You can't get back up on the glide path. As it relates to Food Safety Modernization Act, that's a regulatory requirement that came about a few years ago. It is very difficult for small companies, right? So the regulation is well intended. It's designed to protect consumers. The myth is often that small companies care so much more about quality than big companies. My personal experience is that's not true. That risk management protocols at big companies are actually pretty robust. And these policies are cumbersome for everyone, but they're particularly hard for small companies. So it'll be super expensive to get compliant. The amount of skill that's out there that could help you get compliant is relatively low. And it's part of the reason why we're in business at Bridgetown, right? So people hit a certain level of growth, they say, I can't get through this audit, and then they go to somebody who's a third party who does it all the time. If you're trying to do it on your own, then that would be one of your critical fundraising pillars, right? If you think about what technical skill you need to bring in and why you might take money from the outside, in food, it might be, if you want to manufacture yourself, it's probably a quality and operations person at a pretty senior and experienced level.
Mm-hmm. And I will add to kind of the combination of the supply chain and the safety piece. Glory Bee is a great supplier and has offered to actually extend some of their expertise to their companies that they serve. And so definitely our ecosystem, our food and bev ecosystem in Oregon is strong in that way and very open and willing to share. So sometimes it's just asking and not being afraid to ask.
I would say one other thing as you grow is quality is objective. It's not subjective. One of founders' pitfalls is it's whatever works for me as the founder, right? So I have so much emotion wrapped up in this business. I care so much about it. I want to touch every bag of granola that comes off the line. I want to experience every part of my product. I want to grab every shoe that comes off the line, every shirt. The reality is you can make most of those decisions objectively if you say, these are the things that are critical to making my product, and you can write them down. It is one of the hardest transitions for founders to make as they grow their companies, but it is fundamental to getting to a place where you can scale and allow other people to take care of your product the same way you would. Kelly, my wife, for years would obsess about the granola's too burnt, the granola's too light. Right now, I'm like, Kelly, you can't work 22 hours a day. I mean, I think she tried a couple times, but you just can't do it. You have to be able to tell someone else what is essential to making your product well, and that's really part of how you scale. Is it can't just be a subjective sense. You've got to put those things in place.
Yep, absolutely. And you had touched a little bit, Dan, on investment and that you might get investment dollars to back a food safety effort within your company, but can you share at different stages of a company, and granted everybody's going to have different goals for their company, different value sets, but can you talk a little bit about through the progression of a company's life cycle when it makes sense to have investment dollars or financing, bank financing?
Sure. Who
would be good partners and why? What do you apply the dollars to?
Yeah, that's a great question, one we hear a lot. I think that you have to get really clear about who you are as a company, what's your purpose, what are your principles, what are your goals, right? Because the minute you let somebody else in with their checkbook, they're gonna start driving their agenda. So if you're not clear on who you wanna be and where you wanna get to, you're gonna get knocked off course and you're gonna be confronting a different perspective as you bring investors in. The same would be true of executive talent, right? So you're going to start growing and you're going to bring somebody in, a quality person per se, to help you. They're going to come with their background, right? And they're going to come with their vision of what Red Plate Foods is. You need to get them on your vision of what it is. And I think that that's fundamental with investors, because investors feel if things aren't going well, that they should offer more advice. And then that advice turns into something else. And so you're going to be very clear about what your goals are, why you're taking money, and what you're trying to achieve with it. Depends on what industry you're in. If you're in the food industry, the financing capability in Oregon is relatively thin on early stage companies. There's a good guy here in town named Jake Kindrachuk who runs a small fund who's invested in Brew Doctor, Cure, Jacobson Salt, a couple other companies, and he's helped those businesses. He's a good guy. He's got some good partners. But it's not necessarily easy, and I think that outside money is really expensive, so be thoughtful about why you want to take it, right? Those folks are expecting 30, 40, 50% returns on their money. That's not easy to come by, and they're going to have strong opinions on how they're going to get that return. And so I'm a little biased. Bare Naked, Happy Baby, Bridgetown, we haven't taken any outside money on any of the three. I have seen it done differently in other deals, but I think maintaining ownership control of all those businesses was essential to us at the beginning from a goal standpoint. And I think that's what you got to think of. Do you and Chell want to own the business and control it? And does that mean going slower is okay? Or do you want to bring somebody else in and maybe go faster, have a smaller piece of a bigger pie?
So were you financing, was all the growth financed then out of margin from?
Costco. So Costco pays in 10 days. So for those of you who have food businesses or businesses where you can sell something at Costco, they're going to pay you in 10 days. And the essence of not having to take other people's money is shortening your cash conversion cycle as short as you can. So look at how long does it take for you to pay people, and how long does it take for people to pay you, and how many days of inventory do you have? If you add up those two and subtract how long you pay people, and that number is close to zero, you won't have to take any money, right? People oftentimes talk about the genius of Amazon. Part of the genius of Amazon is their cash conversion cycle. Many entrepreneurs, because they get so excited about the opportunity to grow, aren't thoughtful about cash. Bare Naked, 40% of our business was Costco. They paid in 10 days. We raised less than $4 million from friends and family to get to $60 million in sales. So it was somewhat out of margin, but it's not necessarily just the margin, it's how fast are you collecting on what you're doing. Your business, that's much harder to do. So you got to be, in your business model and your channel decisions, you got to be thoughtful about that.
Yep, when Dan and I met last week, he very kindly avoided the word, or tactfully avoided the word crazy when he was talking about us. Typically when people are going into food, they have a product and they're working on their marketing and building their brand and their relationship within their channels, and they have somebody else co-pack. And then on the other side, you can be a co-packer for food companies. And we are doing both. So Dan was pointing out we'd bitten off quite a project.
I think the word I would have used was heroic, not crazy. And you know, Becca stands for something, right? She said that I want to offer an experience to people who have allergen-sensitive diets that they can't get in any other way. And so it's not easy, it's never easy. It is a little crazy, but it's crazy in a good way, I think.
Well, and I think when my husband and I started the company, we really also looked at what expertise we had on the team being us, but my husband has a great background in finance and industrial and manufacturing operations, and then my background being more sales and marketing. So we did have a unique skill set to apply to it, and I don't know that we would be in the same spot without both of us having that different background. So, all right. Well, I think I've come to the end of my cheat sheet list here on my hum bottle, but Mitch had suggested we might also just talk about what we're seeing in the natural foods industry.
Sure.
So, from our perspective, we sit here in Portland, which feels a lot like we are the epicenter, if you will, of a lot of the food trends that are going on, but definitely plant-based. I think that has begun and will continue to happen. We definitely see that up in the Seattle area. I think it's transferring down into California, and it's all over Expo West and all the trade periodicals. So that's something that we're working within, and we see a future in. So.
Yeah, I suppose on that side, Oregon, Portland in particular, it's great, right? It's such a creative, engaged community in food and creativity and ideas. I would love to see people who start businesses here stick with them a little longer. There's a little bit of a, hey, I got it going, and then it seems like as the creativity perhaps leads to maybe a little bit more of the systems and the scaling, people are like, yeah, I'm not as interested anymore. It'd be nice to see, in my opinion, some of the stump towns and folks of the world kind of go the course as opposed to having to make different decisions. In terms of trends that are coming, CBD's big in food. You're already seeing that. Collagen, hydrolyzed collagen is very popular. So I think those are probably the two biggest trends we see in the portable healthy snacks. Plant protein, sure, that's kind of been done a little bit on the front end, I think. So it's probably more in CBD and collagen and alternative proteins, I guess.
Yeah, and I think always the next discovery of the next superfood. That won't end. Yeah. Who knows what it'll be 3 years from now, but I think that
everybody wants the magic, right? The magic pill or the
bullet.
Yeah.
And actually, and one thing that we're seeing is low sugar. I mean, I know that's a really broad statement, but definitely lower sugar alternatives in all categories. So.
Yeah, I think as you guys, we talked about innovation to start, and there's certainly people in here who are outside of food. one of the things that we've seen at Bridgetown as we've scaled is I've asked people to come into the business who have been at much bigger, much more structured companies. And it is a challenge to maintain an innovative mindset, to give people the freedom to be innovative. I think there's a good book called The Founder's Mentality out there about how you scale companies, how you retain that insurgent mentality, the owner's mindset, and then kind of an obsession on your customer experience. But Oregon is just a great place to be growing a business. There's so much creativity here. People are so interested and passionate about what they do that as someone who grew up in New England, I love living here because there's just a lot of energy. But it'd be nice to see a little bit more of an ecosystem to support those companies continue to grow as they scale. And if there are folks in food who I can ever help, then please reach out. I'm not hard to find.
Yep, and likewise us too. We're not at the point that Dan and Kelly are, but happy to answer questions and help. All right.
Great. How are we doing on time?
You've got about 4 minutes.
Oh, good. All right.
Take some questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Wow, we covered
Yeah,
it
we're
all.
going
You're
right
ready
there.
to start?
Yeah.
You talked about why companies were hitting a wall here. I see a lot of early exits here. I totally agree. Can you talk to why you think that is and maybe what we can do as a community to kind of bridge the gap?
Sure. So the question was, why do I see companies hitting a wall and then selling instead of continuing to grow? I think culturally, there's a little bit of a sellout mentality here of if you get too big, it's not cool anymore, it's not authentic anymore, you've kind of sold out the initial vision. I don't think that has to be true, but I think that there's a little bit of a cultural barrier here that, like, for instance, living between Boston and New York, that doesn't exist, but the passion and the creativity doesn't exist living in the kind of New England area that does here. So I think there's some cultural barriers. I don't think there's a lot of financial partners here. I don't think that, when we built Bare Naked, we raised money with friends and family in the community. When we built Happy Baby, we raised money from friends and family in the community. I don't see the same level of resources here dedicated in the angel investing networks that I saw back there. That's where someone like Jake, I think, has stepped in and done a great job. But I think it's the capital that's available. I think it's the cultural. I also think that from a skill standpoint, Portland's a small market. And so as you grow, you start looking for people with expertise. If it's something like food, there really aren't that many big food companies here. There's Reese's, Mondelez, Frito have plants here, but Pacific just sold. Bridgetown, we're about 120 million in sales. We're probably towards the bigger end. And so, I don't know what I don't know, and as I try to find people to come in, my bench is limited here. And so people oftentimes run out of what they know, and they have to say, I'm gonna have to sell this so somebody else can come in and figure out how to get it to the next level. So there's a little bit of a bench issue too, kind of a talent gap. I think that as people move here and we build more companies, that'll start to subside a little bit. Yeah.
You said you raised friends and family money, but then you said you didn't take any outside money. How does that fit in your scheme?
Awesome question. So the question was, I said we didn't take outside money, but then I said we take friends and family money. My wife will tell you I contradict myself all the time, so thank you for highlighting that incongruency. What I meant by that is we didn't take institutional. So if you called me and said, hey Dan, I have a great idea, I want to raise money, would you put $50,000 into it? Then that would be what I'd call like a friends and family round. If you went to Endeavor Capital here in Portland and said, hey, make an investment in us like you did in New Seasons, they're going to put it in, but the person who's managing that money is not actually necessarily putting their own money in, right? It's a fund, it's an institutional fund that has promised to an insurance company or to a state pension company that they're going to return that money in 3 to 5 years with a certain return. Most angel investors are pretty patient, they're pretty passive, and they tend to constitute like 2 or 3% owners, and so they're not going to significantly influence your agenda. If you go to an institutional investor, they're going to either want to buy 51% and control your business, or they're going to want to have a lot of contractual protection that allows them to control aspects of your business. So what I should have probably said is we didn't take institutional money or significantly influential external money. We focus on more friends and family who are kind of bought into the long-term vision, and we're in smaller increments.